looking like 10 over 10 plus 10 minus nothing. Add everything. That's me.
On a quiet morning in February 2025, a high-stakes police operation in Hanover ended in the death of Rushawn Patterson, the man accused of killing Jamaican influencer Aneka, Slickianna, Townsend. The operation was described by authorities as intelligence-driven, but the full details remain under wraps. With Patterson now dead, the murder trial he was awaiting can no longer proceed, and with it, many vital questions. Why did he allegedly target her? What really happened during their final night together? And who else, if anyone, played a part? Her family publicly declared the confrontation as justice served, yet the public narrative is far from settled. As the investigation shifts to secondary legal matters, the case becomes less about courtroom closure and more about the wider, unspoken forces that brought them both to that moment. Stay with us as we unravel this shocking story and uncover the heartbreaking details of what led to this senseless loss. Before we begin, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? And what are your thoughts as the story unfolds? Welcome to True Crime Tales, where we reveal the crimes that shock communities and the secrets hidden behind closed doors. These are real people, real events, real consequences. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's begin. Aneka Slickianna. Townsend was born in Waterhouse, St. Andrew, Jamaica, as one of 4 children. She attended Marvelly Primary School and later Edith Dalton James High School. Her family used several nicknames for her, including Dumpling Cayenne and Slickianna. These names were common within her household and community and reflected the familiarity people had with her. Her upbringing in Waterhouse placed her within a close family structure, and she maintained active communication with siblings and extended relatives. Throughout her early years, she developed a reputation for being outgoing and sociable. Relatives described her as someone who forgave easily and trusted people readily. Those around her often noted her willingness to give, help, or share with others. This reputation continued into adulthood and extended into her online presence. As social media grew, she created an identity under the name Slickianna, which became her public brand. She gained a significant following as an influencer whose content centered on lifestyle, fashion, and beauty. Her posts were consistent, curated, and designed to maintain visibility. She promoted products, participated in collaborations, and displayed a high engagement profile, especially on Instagram under the handle at Slickianna876. Outside of social media, she either operated or contributed to a small business brand connected to her online image. Her public persona was widely recognized within Jamaica's influencer community. Privately, she maintained close ties with her mother and siblings. She also reconnected with extended relatives shortly before the events of case. Reports indicate that she had recently visited a long-lost aunt, suggesting an effort to strengthen family ties. While her online life was public, documented, and visible, her personal relationships, interactions, and social movements were not always shared publicly. This difference between public presentation and private activities became relevant in the timeline leading to the events of October 2022. On October 18, 2022, she celebrated her mother's birthday. This gathering was one of the last documented family events she attended. On that same day, she visited an aunt she had only recently reconnected with. Family members confirmed these 2 events as part of her movements. The next day, October 19th, she had her last known conversation with her mother. The content of the conversation was normal and gave no indication of unusual activity or concern. On October 20th, 2022, she traveled from Kingston to Montego Bay. The reason for this trip has not been confirmed. Possibilities include business-related activities, meeting someone for personal reasons, or social plans. No official statement has clarified this aspect of the timeline. However, communication records and witness accounts confirm that she had prior interactions with Rushawn Patterson, a resident of Hanover. Patterson had been in contact with her before the night of October 20th. His background included previous encounters with law enforcement, including an unrelated past assault allegation. Public records place him in the Hanover area during the days prior. His connection to her became a central focus of the investigation, once her movements were traced. At approximately 7:30 p.m. on October 20th, Patterson picked her up in Montego Bay. Surveillance records and witness statements indicate he was the last known person to be seen with her. After meeting, they traveled to a restaurant in Hanover. The length of their stay at the restaurant has not been officially disclosed. After leaving the restaurant, they proceeded to a guest house in St. James. Inside the guest house, police reports indicate that an argument occurred between the two. The exact origin of the argument has not been made public. The timeline of escalation, how long the dispute lasted, whether others overheard anything, and the exact sequence of events inside the room has not been fully disclosed by investigators. Available information states only that a conflict took place. A post-mortem examination later revealed that the cause of death was strangulation. The estimated time of death was between 11 p.m. on October 20th and 9 a.m. on October 21st. This range is based on forensic analysis of the body and environmental factors. At the time it was discovered, there were no indications that additional individuals were present in the room during the critical hours. Evidence pointed to a struggle occurring prior to the fatal act, although the detailed forensic timeline has not been publicly released. After the incident in the guest house, the body was removed from the location. Investigators determined that the body was transported and later disposed of at sea off the coast of Reading, St. James. The disposal suggested an attempt to obscure the timeline and location of death, as well as an attempt to prevent immediate identification. The location where the body was found became a critical point in reconstructing the timeline. The body was discovered by individuals in the area who reported seeing it floating at sea. Law enforcement retrieved the remains and began the process of identification, which was completed through standard procedures. Once confirmed, investigators backtracked her movements using surveillance footage, phone data, and witness accounts. This process led to identifying Patterson as a primary person of interest. Upon locating Patterson, law enforcement questioned him regarding his involvement. He was initially uncooperative and offered conflicting statements concerning his movements and interactions with her on the night of October 20th. Additional evidence, including digital records and forensic findings, aligned with the timeline, placing him with her throughout the evening and into the early hours of October 21st. Investigators then focused on reconstructing the precise sequence of events inside the guest house. Room records, entry logs, and forensic examination supported the conclusion that the fatal incident took place within that time frame. There were no signs of an external intruder, and no evidence pointed to involvement of additional individuals. The disposal of the body in the sea indicated an attempt to distance the crime scene from the discovery site. As the investigation progressed, statements from individuals who knew both parties were reviewed. Communications between the two prior to the night of the incident were analyzed for context. However, no publicly released document has confirmed the exact purpose of their meeting or the trigger of the argument. The case continued under active review, with authorities compiling digital evidence, witness statements, and forensic results to establish a full narrative for judicial proceedings. On the morning of October 21st, Marine police units were dispatched to the shoreline after receiving a report of a body floating near the coast. The call came from individuals who had noticed the object drifting unusually close to land. Upon arrival, officers used a small marine vessel to reach the location and confirmed that the object was a human body. The body was retrieved and brought ashore, where first responders conducted a preliminary assessment. Identification procedures began immediately. The body exhibited physical features consistent with recent photographs of Aneka, Slickianna, Townsend, a widely recognized social media figure. Formal confirmation followed shortly after, based on facial identification, and later secondary confirmation by relatives. The state of the body indicated no signs of long-term immersion in water, leading investigators to conclude that it had been placed in the sea recently, rather than drifting for an extended period. A post-mortem examination was conducted. Forensic pathologists determined that the cause of death was manual strangulation. Bruising patterns, neck trauma, and other anatomical indicators supported this conclusion. The report also indicated that the estimated time of death fell between the late hours of October 20th and the early morning of October 21st. These findings established a narrow investigative window and provided a definitive ruling that the death was a homicide. The discovery rapidly attracted public attention. Local media outlets reported the incident within hours. Social media accounts circulated photographs, timelines, and speculation, generating widespread discussion and demand for clarity. The nature of Townsend's public presence contributed to the scale of the reaction, and pressure increased for authorities to release information and accelerate the investigation. Once the body was identified, law enforcement elevated the case to a high-priority investigation. Multiple specialized divisions were activated to ensure comprehensive evidence collection. Cyber forensic teams initiated the extraction of data from digital devices associated with the victim, including communication logs, call histories, application activity, and GPS data. Criminal intelligence units analyzed known associates, recent interactions, and persons of interest connected to the victim's movements. Marine police documented the exact recovery location, tidal patterns, and drift trajectory to assess where the body may have entered the water. Forensic pathology teams processed the autopsy findings for inclusion in the investigative timeline. Technical teams accessed and reviewed CCTV recordings from road networks and private establishments. The Jamaican Eye surveillance system provided footage from critical traffic points, allowing investigators to reconstruct routes traveled during the final hours before the victim's disappearance. Evidence collection expanded to locations linked to the victim's last known activities. A guest house believed to be connected to the events of the night was searched. Forensic samples were collected from the room, including potential biological material, trace fibers, and other surfaces. A vehicle associated with one of the individuals under investigation was examined for fingerprints, fluid samples, and any indications of the victim's presence. Personal items belonging to the victim were also logged and analyzed. Digital communication records formed a significant portion of the investigative framework. Investigators created a detailed timeline by aligning call logs, messages, and travel routes. This timeline was used to identify who last made contact with the victim and establish the sequence of movements leading up to the estimated time of death. A man identified as Rushawn Patterson became a central figure in the investigation. After reviewing digital records, surveillance footage, and witness statements, authorities initiated a search for him. On November 2nd, 2022, Patterson was located during a targeted operation in Hanover. He was taken into custody and questioned. Following further review of evidence, he was formally charged with murder on November 11th, 2022. A second individual, Rowan Early B. Rose, a security guard, was charged with misprision of felony, meaning he was accused of having knowledge of the crime and failing to report to authorities. His involvement was considered secondary but relevant to the case's completion. The defense for Patterson stated publicly that the murder charge had been influenced by public pressure, suggesting that the prosecution was responding to the high-profile nature of the case rather than relying solely on evidence. They challenged the strength of the forensic and digital material collected, questioning the completeness and reliability of the investigative files. This set the stage for what would become a prolonged legal process. The court phase of the case began, but soon faced substantial delays. Multiple adjournments occurred due to incomplete forensic files. At several court mentions, the prosecution noted that critical documents had not yet been provided. These pending items included the DNA analysis report, full digital forensic extractions, a finalized post-mortem documentation package, and chain of custody statements for key evidence. Without these components, the prosecution could not proceed to the next stage of the trial process. In addition to evidence-related delays, the health condition of the primary defendant, Patterson, contributed to further postponements. He was diagnosed with hemophilia, a medical condition that affects blood clotting and requires ongoing treatment. His attorneys requested additional time during hearings to allow him to receive medical attention and manage complications related to the disorder. Courts granted temporary postponements on humanitarian grounds. In July 2024, Patterson was granted bail with specific medical conditions attached, despite earlier concerns raised by prosecutors that he posed a potential flight risk. The provision of bail marked a significant stage shift as the case continued without the defendant being held in custody. Throughout 2024 and 2025, prosecutors remained unable to proceed to trial because several required forensic submissions were still outstanding. Digital forensics reports, which were necessary to authenticate timelines and communication data, had not yet been completed. DNA results and confirmation of evidence handling protocols were also delayed. These gaps allowed the defense to push for dismissal or a reduction of charges, citing procedural deficiencies and incomplete documentation. Meanwhile, family members of the victim publicly expressed concern and frustration. They stated that the repeated adjournments created uncertainty and prolonged the resolution of the case. Although their reactions did not impact court procedures directly, they reflected the growing attention surrounding the case's lack of progress. By early 2025, the case remained open but inactive in terms of trial advancement. Investigators awaited the final pieces of forensic documentation, while the defense continued to leverage the delays as part of its strategy. The combined effect of missing reports, medical challenges, and legal disputes resulted in a stalled process with no confirmed trial date. The death of Rushawn Patterson in February 2025 altered the direction and outcome of an already complex criminal matter. The original case involved an investigation that depended heavily on his status as a primary suspect, and his death during a police operation changed the legal, procedural, and public expectations immediately. This report examines the circumstances surrounding Patterson's death, the implications of his absence on the pending legal processes, the reaction from the victim's family, the wider societal impact, the unresolved areas of the investigation, and the long-term effects on public awareness and institutional systems. The purpose of this document is to clarify the sequence of developments using only verifiable details within the given parameters, explaining each component step by step, without adding speculation or emotional analysis. In February 2025, reports confirmed that Rushawn Patterson was killed during a police operation in the parish of Hanover. The operation was officially described as intelligence-led, which indicates that law enforcement acted based on prior verified information regarding his movements, location, associations, or possible activities. This type of operation usually involves targeted planning rather than random enforcement encounters. Authorities stated that Patterson became involved in a confrontation during the course of the operation. The details of the interaction were not released in full, consistent with internal policy, pending post-operation reviews, administrative evaluations, and possible examination by oversight bodies. Law enforcement noted that the incident resulted in Patterson sustaining fatal injuries. The announcement of his death confirmed that the primary suspect in the associated homicide investigation was no longer alive. This created an immediate and irreversible shift in the procedural pathway of the case. Any pending court appearances, hearings, or ongoing investigative steps that required his participation ceased by default. His legal status changed from an accused individual awaiting trial to a deceased person who could no longer face charges or provide testimony. The final reports from authorities stated only the cause of death as resulting from the police confrontation, without expanding on tactical details, the specific intelligence used to locate him, or the operational decisions made during the event. Reviews of the operation remained internal and not publicly disclosed. Patterson's death had a direct and legally binding impact on the progress of the ongoing criminal case. Under the law, a defendant cannot be prosecuted after death. As a result, the murder trial that had been pending could not continue. Any charges filed against him were nullified by default. A trial requires a living defendant who can be represented, questioned, and subjected to judicial evaluation. This legal shift affected several components of the case. Court proceedings rely on the presence of the accused, legal representation, prosecution evidence, and judicial oversight. With Patterson deceased, the court no longer had jurisdiction to continue prosecuting the murder charge. The case file against him remained part of the record, but its procedural purpose concluded. Although the primary charge was terminated, additional legal matters persisted. A secondary accused individual remained charged with misprision, meaning the person allegedly withheld information, failed to report, or participated in concealing facts related to the crime. These charges did not depend on Patterson's presence in court. Therefore, that case continued. Patterson's death removed the possibility of statements, clarifications, or admissions that might have occurred during trial. Whatever explanations, motives, or defenses he might have provided were no longer accessible. This limited the ability to establish a full chronological reconstruction of events. Cross-examination would have been one of the tools available to verify inconsistencies, probe motives, and test the accuracy of evidence. Since the primary suspect was no longer alive, This procedural avenue closed permanently. One of the central unresolved components of the original case was motive. Without trial, there could be no opportunity to officially establish whether jealousy, argument, financial dispute, coercive conflict, or another undisclosed factor contributed to the events. His death prevented further courtroom clarification. Following the announcement of Patterson's death, the victim's mother publicly stated that she felt justice had been achieved. This statement became widely circulated in media discussions surrounding the case's conclusion. Her comment indicated that she accepted the outcome as a resolution within the framework of the events that had unfolded. However, the broader public reaction was divided. Some segments considered the case closed based on belief that the death of the primary suspect signified the final step toward justice. Others questioned whether the absence of a full trial meant that significant information remained unrevealed. These differing responses demonstrated contrasting interpretations of what constitutes closure in cases where key suspects die before trial. The family continued to express interest in receiving full investigative disclosures, particularly regarding forensic documents, timelines, and procedural decisions. Their call for clarity continued after his death. Even though the primary legal process was closed, the developments in this case contributed to national conversations across several categories. Each conversation evolved due to the nature of the crime, the visibility of the individuals involved, and the eventual death of the prime suspect before trial. The case amplified national discussions on the increasing number of crimes involving female victims. Public forums, advocacy groups, and community organizations used the case as a reference point to highlight structural vulnerabilities and the need for systemic intervention. Because the victim was a public figure, the case generated conversation about the risks associated with public visibility, online engagement, and interactions that occur as a result of digital influence. Many content creators reference the case when discussing safety protocols, public boundaries, and private interactions. Public discourse emphasized patterns of behavior that may signal potential dangers in interpersonal environments. Discussions examine how disagreements, power imbalances, or hidden conflicts may escalate. The original case had experienced extended delays due to forensic backlogs and legal scheduling issues. Public commentary focused on how delays affect both families and judicial outcomes. Roundtable discussions, editorials, and policy forums used this case as an example of systemic challenges in processing and presenting forensic evidence efficiently. Authorities relied heavily on digital evidence, including phone data, travel traces, and communication logs. The case demonstrated how technology forms an essential part of modern investigative frameworks. Public commentary emphasized both the strengths and limitations of digital tools in reconstructing timelines and identifying suspects. Despite the conclusion of the primary case due to Patterson's death, several questions remain unanswered. These questions persist because the trial did not occur, preventing a complete judicial exploration of the events. Uncertainty remains regarding whether others were present or involved in the events leading up to the crime. No formal charges were brought beyond misprision, but unanswered inquiries remain regarding involvement or assistance. Because courtroom examination never took place, the exact chronological sequence inside the guest house remains incomplete. Forensic data and witness statements only provide partial reconstruction. There was no final determination of motive. Without testimony, documented court arguments, or judicial findings, the underlying cause of the incident remains unidentified. The impact of the 2-year delay in forensic processing leaves questions about whether earlier analysis might have produced clearer or more complete results. Questions remain regarding whether public pressure influenced the pace, structure, or direction of investigative steps or charging decisions. Because the primary suspect died before trial, any missing information he alone possessed was permanently lost. No court-led question and answer process occurred, leaving gaps that cannot be reconstructed. Following Patterson's death and the closing of the primary case, several long-term effects and developments continued. The victim's funeral and memorial events reinforced her relevance in Jamaica's digital culture. These gatherings highlighted her influence and recognized the effects of her public work. The family pursued access to investigative records, focusing on transparency and accuracy. Their efforts emphasize the importance of complete documentation, even when a case cannot proceed in court. The case continues to be referenced in conversations about safety, violence, and the experiences of public-facing individuals. Legal experts, journalists, and advocacy organizations cite it when discussing needed systematic reforms. The victim's social media pages remain active as records of her public presence. They serve as digital archives, contributing to ongoing conversations about safety, visibility, and the responsibilities of online figures. The death of Rushawn Patterson terminated the legal pathway that would have produced a full judicial account of the events. With the main suspect deceased, the case was effectively closed, leaving remaining legal matters limited to misprision charges. Although the procedural aspects concluded, unresolved questions persist because trial-based clarification never occurred. The case continues to influence national conversations on violence, safety, legal delays, and systemic reform. If you found this story as gripping and heartbreaking as we did, don't forget to like this video and share it with others. And if you want to hear more true crime stories that uncover the mysteries behind these tragic events, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell. You won't want to miss our latest stories, updates, and discussions. Thank you for joining us on this journey to seek justice and explore the truth. Together, we can make a difference. Until next time, stay safe and stay aware.